repeat if you feel comfortable. Okay. Let me adjust the position of my laptop. I think Nartha Vilas Prabhu is trying to live stream it into Facebook, YouTube. So that's what you, okay. We're in chapter 9, verse 34. Yudito Raga Raja Vidruma Vishvak Kajalulita Sramvari Alankrishne Mama Nishtita Mama Nisita Sharir Sharai Vidiyamana Vachi Vilasat Kavache Astu Krishna Atma Yudituraga Raja Vidurma Visvak Kachalulita Sramavari Alankrishte Mama Nisita Shairi Vidhi Amana Tvachi Vilasat Kavachat Astu Krishna Atma Yudituraga Vid Dhurma Visvak Kachalulita Sramavari Alankrtasye Mama Nisita Sharir Vidhi Amana Tvachi Vilasat Kavach Astu Krishna Atma. Any of you feel comfortable repeating it? You can just. Srila Prabhupada said we're not Sanskrit scholars, we're trying to be devotees, so it's not our ability to recite in Sanskrit that matters, it's just our effort.
I can type it.
Okay. Oh, thank you for joining. Hare Krishna. Please.
Yudhituraga Rajo Vidumra Vishvak Kacharulita Shramavari Alankartasye Mama Nishita Sharir Vibhidhyamana Tvachivila Sad Kavachestu Krishna Atma.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathan Vilas Prabhu. Anybody else?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Okay.
Yudhituraga Rajo Vidurma Vishwak Kachalulita Sramavari Alankritasya Mama Nisita Sarair Vividyamana Tavichi Vilasat Kavachestu Krishna Atma.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Okay, I will go ahead. So synonyms: Yudhi, on the battlefield; Turaga, horses; Rajaha, dust; Vidhurma, turned an ashen color; Vishwak, waving; Kacha, hair; Lulita, scattered; Shamavari, perspiration; Alankarita, decorated with; Asye, onto the face; Mama, my; Nisita, sharp; Shari, by the arrows; Vividyam, amana, pierced by; Tvachi, in the skin; Tvasi, in the skin; Vilasa, enjoying pleasure; Kavach, protecting armor; Astu, let there be; to Sri Krishna Atma, mind. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Itanamne Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pachadane Shri Shunyavadi Pashtatai Deshatarine. On the battlefield where Sri Krishna attended Arjun out of friendship, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna turned ashen due to the dust raised by the hoofs of the horses. And because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations, intensified by the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows, were enjoyed by him. Let my mind thus go unto Sri Krishna. So this is Bhishma Dev. This prayer is about the pastime of Bhishma Dev leaving his body on the battlefield of Kurukshetra while lying on a bed of arrows, surrounded by his relatives and beloved grandchildren, the Pandavas, Lord Shri Krishna, and all the great sages and sadhus of the entire universe surrounding him. And so he's recollecting what happened in Kurukshetra battle between him and the interaction between him and Lord Krishna. So purport, it's a fairly long purport and a lot of deep realizations by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada came to the United States with just one book, which is Srimad Bhagavatam, and in particular, out of the 12 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam, he came with one volume, which is volume 1, which at that time he had in 3 different parts. So it can teach us the importance of Srimad Bhagavatam, just the first volume, that it was the impetus that brought him. He wanted to share it with everybody. So, it's a wonderful book to read and to absorb oneself into. So please try to read this on your own. You can do so by seeing this. You can see this thing called vedabase.io. So since some of you may not be familiar, so you just go into this website, vedabase.io, and then you have all of Srila Prabhupada's books, and the one we're doing now is called Srimad Bhagavatam, and you click on that, and then you click on Canto 1. See, you can see there's 12 different volumes. Click on that, and then the chapter we're doing is chapter 9, Passing Away of Bhishma Dev, and you can change the view. Right now it's just showing it in English and only the translations. Change it into what's called advanced view. And here you can pick whether you want to see the verse in Devanagari or the Sanskrit equivalent, and the synonyms, the translation, and then Srila Prabhupada has comment on each verse. So that's how you get into this web page. Is that clear, Chandrasekhar Prabhu and Harshita Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. So it's free and you can do it at any time. It's also possible on your cell phone if you're not in front of a laptop. So that's just background. So I'll read Srila Prabhupada's purport and then we'll kind of go along. The Lord is the absolute form of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. As such, transcendental loving service to the Lord in one of the 5 principal relations, namely Shanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, and Madhura, i.e. neutrality, servership, fraternity, paternal affection, and conjugal love, is graciously accepted by the Lord when offered to the Lord in genuine love and affection. Graciously accepted by the Lord when offered to the Lord in love and affection. Shri Bhishma Dev is a great devotee of the Lord in the relationship of servitorship. Thus, his throwing of sharp arrows at the transcendental body of the Lord is as good as worship of another devotee who throws soft roses upon him. It appears that Bhishma Dev is repenting the actions he committed against the person of the Lord. But factually, the Lord's body was not at all pain due to his transcendental existence. His body is not matter. Both he himself and his body are complete spiritual identity. Spirit is never pierced, burned, dried, moistened, etc. This is vividly explained in Bhagavad Gita. In chapter 2, you can go over that in great detail, where Lord Krishna explains his identity and the identity of Arjuna and all the warriors in Kurukshetra, and tries to establish that we're the soul, not the body. So also it is stated in Skanda Purana. It is stated there that spirit is always uncontaminated and indestructible. It cannot be distressed, nor can it be dried up. When Lord Vishnu in his incarnation appears before us, he seems to be like one of the conditioned souls. We had Janmashtami last week, and a lot of people don't understand the very special nature of the Lord's descent onto this planet. Materially encaged, we think he is, just to bewilder the Asuras or the non-believers who are always alert to kill the Lord, even from the very beginning of his appearance. Kamsa wanted to kill Krishna and Ravana wanted to kill Ram. because foolishly they are unaware of the fact that the Lord is never killed, and the spirit is never annihilated. Therefore, Bhishma Dev's piercing of the Lord is a sort of bewildering problem for the non-devotee atheists, but those who are devotees or liberated souls are not bewildered. You can see this whenever you talk to people from India when they talk about this pastime of Bhishma Dev shooting arrows at Lord Krishna. And there's some level of confusion sometimes that people have about why is this occurring, and material explanations will come up. So Srila Prabhupada is trying to dispel that. Bhishma Dev appreciated the all-merciful attitude of the Lord because he did not leave Arjun alone. Although he was disturbed by sharpened arrows of Bhishma Dev, nor was he reluctant to come before Bhishma's deathbed, even though he was ill-treated by him on the battlefield. Bhishma's repentance and the Lord's merciful attitude are both unique in this picture. Sri Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, a great acharya and a devotee in the humor of conjugal love. What that means is that all acharyas are the descent of, just like the Lord descends onto this planet to give us guidance and inspiration and insight into what the spiritual world is like. Acharyas are great pure devotees that descend onto this planet, not because they're forced to by karma or guna, but descend for the purpose of enlightening us about the nature of Lord and our relationship with the Lord and how to act in that relationship. Each acharya has their own state of relationship with Lord Krishna. So some may be in the relationship of being friend with Lord Krishna, some may be in the relationship of having parental affection for Lord Krishna, and some may be in the relationship of being the lovers of the Lord, like a man and a woman. And so that's what he's saying, that Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur is in the humor of conjugal love with the Lord. So meaning his commentaries, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's commentaries on the Shastra will carry that flavor of prem in his comments about Bhagwan. Remarks very saliently in this regard. He says that the wounds created on the body of the Lord by the sharpened arrows of Bhishma Dev were as pleasing to the Lord as the biting of a fiancé who bites the Lord's body directly by a strong sense of sexual desire. Such biting by the opposite sex is never taken as a sign of enmity, even if there's wound on the body. Therefore, the fighting as an exchange of transcendental pleasure between the Lord and his pure devotee, Sri Bhishma Dev, was not at all mundane. Besides that, since the Lord's body and Lord are identical, there is no possibility of wounds in the absolute body. The apparent wounds caused by the sharpened arrows are misleading to the common man, but one who has a little absolute knowledge can understand the transcendental exchange in the chivalrous relation. So he's pointing out that the relationship between Bhishma Dev and Bhagwan is one of chivalry. The Lord was perfectly happy with the wounds caused by the sharpened arrows of Bhishma Dev. The word Vividyamana is significant because the Lord's skin is not different from the Lord. Lord's skin is not different from the Lord because our skin is different from our soul. In our case, the Vividyamana, or being bruised and cut, would have been quite suitable. So he's pointing out that the Lord's skin is transcendental, it's not material. So it's not like, okay, he gets pierced by arrows and it's causing him pain or some sort of serious threat to his existence. Transcendental bliss is of different varieties, and the variety of activities in the mundane world is but a perverted reflection of transcendental bliss. So this is talking about relationships between the Lord and his devotees called rasas. Because everything in the material world is quite qualitatively mundane and is full of inebrities. What inebrities means? No? So inebrities means kind of like intoxication, when one is under the influence of something. And in the material world, it's thought to be like influence of drugs or influence of alcohol. But in spiritual relationships, it means that the intoxication is one of a spiritual relationship. Whereas in the absolute realm, because everything is of the same absolute nature, there are varieties of enjoyment without inebriety. Meaning the relationship between Bhagavan and his pure devotees doesn't have a material aspect to it. Thus the Lord enjoyed the wounds created by the great devotee, Bhishma Deva, because Bhishma Deva is a devotee. In the chivalrous relationship, he fixes up his mind on Krishna in that wounded condition. So a fairly long purport, and I'll come back to the translation. On the battlefield where Sri Krishna attended Arjuna out of friendship, the flowing hair of Lord Sri Krishna turned ashen due to the dust raised by hoofs of the horses. Because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations, intensified by the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows, were enjoyed by him. Let my mind thus go on to Sri Krishna. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namne Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashtatai Deshatarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gada Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Thank you. So I see we're joined by Poonam Mataji, Neela Mataji, Karmakaran Prabhu, and Vijay Lakshmi Mataji. Thank you, dear devotees, for joining. We have as guest Harshita Mataji and Chandrasekhar Prabhu, devotees that are newly coming with them class. So I was giving some background information on how to get to this verse, to the Veda-based IO, and that's kind of the setting of this verse and Bhishma Dev's prayers and his discussion. So, so I'll speak. As you can imagine, there's a lot one can speak on this verse, and I don't think I'll be able to get to everything in particular, but I'll try to capture some things that I found instructive. So when you think of love, it's not commonly thought of okay, I'm going to shoot arrows at somebody and they're going to get wounds and they're going to enjoy the wounds that they receive and I'll be happy about it. So Srila Prabhupada often quoted this verse when he talked about the inconceivable behavior of devotees who have achieved pure love of God. Yanrachate Krishna Prema Kariya Udaya Tanravakya Kriya Mudra Na Bhujaya. Even the most learned man cannot understand the words, activities, and symptoms of a person situated in love of God. So it's not by intellectual endeavor that one can understand this. It has to be through the instruction of an acharya. Otherwise, you will see all the mundane interpretations you normally see. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that love for Krishna is a manifestation of the Lord's internal energy. or spiritual potency. That's what Srila Prabhupada calls it. And it's free from contamination of the lesser material, apparently material external energy. And Srila Prabhupada points out in this verse that love of Krishna is beyond the influence of what are called the modes of nature, the gunas. And so as a result, even, practicing, let alone the materially conditioned souls, like 99.99% of the world, even us practicing devotees, can have difficulty understanding the behavior of a pure, perfect devotee like Dave with our material mind and intelligence. So we can see in this verse how, Bhishma Dev, just a setting, as we can imagine. While I was chanting Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, I was in my mind contemplating this event that occurred. It's reality, it's not mythology. That, in the midst of a great battle, surrounded by soldiers and warriors waving their swords and arrows and lances and shouting, and the screams of wounded soldiers and the dust, from horses running through the battlefield, and the earth being turned to muddy condition due to the perspiration and blood flowing. Right in the midst of this, Krishna is driving the chariot of Arjun, and Bhishma Dev is facing them in his own chariot. And Bhishma Dev has thrown, or as Prabhupada says, throwing arrows or shooting wave after wave of tremendously powerful arrows onto Arjun's chariot. And so much so that all the other warriors see that Krishna and Arjun and their chariot just disappear behind the curtain or the wave of arrows. Just imagine that. And at that point, it appeared that Arjun was doomed to leave his body before the fierce attack of the great warrior Bhishma Dev. Just to give you a sense, Bhishma Dev, Srila Prabhupada talks about this in Canto 1, when he describes the rishis that were there at the deathbed of Bhishma Dev. Parashuram was there. And as you know, Parashuram fought none other than Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Ramchandraji. And Parashuram also fought Bhishma Dev because of his refusal to marry Amba. I don't have the time to get into that. A lot of you probably know about that past, why he refused to do that, because of his vow of celibacy that he had made to his the father-in-law of his father. So Parashuram was also, because Amba approached Parashuram that, hey, I want to get married to Bhishma Dev, but he's declining. Therefore, Parashuram was a spiritual master of Bhishma Dev. Bhishma Dev is considered a Brahma Rishi. And so Parashuram was unable to convince Bhishma Dev to leave his vow of chastity and marry Amba. And therefore, Parashuram, being who he is, engaged in a battle with Bhishma Dev, and he was unable to defeat Bhishma Dev. So he pronounced that, Bhishma Dev, you are the greatest warrior in this universe. And so that great warrior who was able to bring none other than Parashuram to a standstill, somebody who defeated everybody and even taxed Sri Ramchandra. It's a Leela, of course, where Lord Ramchandra can certainly overcome personality, but in that Leela, Parashuram was able to also stand up to Lord Ram. So you can imagine the strength and the power and the fury of Bhishma Dev's attack on Arjun. Well, then, and there's all this dust and arrows, etc. And then Krishna suddenly stopped the chariot and sprang to the ground. And raising the wheel of the chariot over his head, Bhagavan Shri Krishna raced towards, Bhishma Dev. The Shastras say almost like a lion charging at an elephant. At that point, Bhishma Dev dropped his bow. He let it fall to the ground and stood unarmed, staring at Lord Shri Krishna with unblinking eyes, Mahabharata says, as Bhagavan Shri Krishna furiously runs towards him. And so Bhishma Dev is recalling that event in this verse. And we can close our eyes and try to imagine the same thing. He's remembering, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna. The hair is turned ashen due to dust raised by the horses and the chariots. And because Lord Krishna is running with great energy, somebody who's one step can cover the entire universe in this pastime is running and apparently laboring. And so perspiration, beads of sweat are wetting his face. And Bhishma Dev sees them as decorations due to the arrows that he's shooting at Lord Shri Krishna through his chariot. And Bhishma Dev sees that Lord Krishna is enjoying it. Here are the verses, the last up. And Bhishma Dev is absorbing his mind. Manmana bhavma bhakto madhyaji mam namishkuru mam evasasi satyante pratyani priyasi me. He's absorbing his mind unto Shri Krishna in this mood. Seeing the flowing blackish hair of the Lord. Bhishma Dev is absorbed in that sweetness. We read Damodar Leela where devotees are trying to absorb their mind in the baby Bal Gopal and his beautiful blackish hair. So Bhishma Dev, cannot give up that. Which warrior, when facing another warrior, is going to be noticing the hair of that warrior in this kind of a struggle? So Bhishma Dev is absorbed in that, seeing the hair turned dusty. If you look carefully at like the ISKCON paintings, you'll see that Lord Shri Krishna's hair is not blackish, it's kind of grayish due to the dust in the battlefield. Even that, normally that would not be considered beautiful, but Bhishma Dev, because his eyes are colored with love, sees the beauty in that. And the beads of sweat, why is Lord Krishna having beads of sweat on his face? Because of the acharyas explained, because he's overcome not by the labor of going towards Bhishma Dev, but because of his intense efforts to protect Arjun, his intense love for Arjun. All of these things are, alankara. They're decorations. And they're decorations that are intensified by the arrows of Bhishma Dev. And so Bhishma Dev is understanding that even though, there's this ashen hair, beads of sweat, etc., that Lord Krishna is actually deriving vilasat. He's having pleasure because that would not be considered a decoration if somebody was not feeling happiness on it, right? So Lord Krishna is deriving happiness from Bhishma Dev's military prowess. So he's saying, and then Bhishma Dev is saying that Lord Krishna is enjoying this. So let my mind go into Krishna. Let me absorb myself. So what he's instructing us is that we should not mistake the mood of chivalry, or the relationship or chivalry, where he's fighting for the mood of forgetting that he's a devotee of Lord Krishna, and that nobody can fight with Lord Krishna. He's saying that even though I'm fighting with Lord Krishna, I'm filled with prem, with love, which is a very high relationship. So when we see this, unlike what we see in movies or series or comic books about the battle between Lord Krishna and Bhishma Dev and the Pandavas and the Kauravas, it's not a hostile clash of enemies that it appears to be. It's rather a reciprocation of prem, love between Lord Krishna and his great devotee Bhishma Dev. And that from that, he talks about how Lord Krishna enjoyed it, but Bhishma Dev is absorbing his mind in it as well. So we need to see this verse in that light. Bhishma Dev, we know apparently took the side of the Kauravas, where he fought for Duryodhan, and we've discussed this previously from Mahabharata, that there are multiple reasons for this. The main reason being, one reason being that he had made a vow to his father's wife, husband, father, meaning his father, the father-in-law of his father. He had made a vow that whoever takes the throne, whoever resides in the throne of Hastinapur, I will support them fully, no matter what. Because otherwise his father would not have been able to marry the lady that he wanted to marry. So he's trying to keep that vow of supporting the kingly rulership of Hastinapur, even though he has extreme affection toward the Pandavas. He tried to warn Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana that don't do this. They're your brothers, cousin brothers. There's no reason for this. And then the second reason that the Acharyas explain Bhishma Dev is fighting on this side is that it was Lord Krishna's arrangement for two reasons. One is he wanted to show that even the greatest warrior in the planet, Bhishma Dev, cannot overcome Lord Krishna's will or the virtue of the Pandavas. And then a second deeper reason is that it's a relationship that Srila Prabhupada is pointing out, where he says in here, relationship of chivalry. Lord enjoyed the wounds created by his great devotee Bhishma Dev. Bhishma Dev is a devotee in chivalrous relation. So the chivalry relationship, it's a relationship between the two of them. And if you think about it, the Lord, by his one act, served so many purposes. The battle of Kurukshetra allowed the Pandavas to overcome the Kauravas and allow for peacefulness to be established on the planet. But on another level, the battle of Kurukshetra allowed for Lord Krishna to engage in their loving relationship of warrior against warrior, chivalrous relationship as it's described here. So that's pretty profound when you think about how Lord Krishna was able to fulfill so many purposes just by this one encouragement of Arjuna to fight in the battle. So Srila Prabhupada explains to us that how these relationships that we have in this world, they're just a reflection of what really happens. Srila Prabhupada says, let me find it here. The Lord is graciously accepting when a devotee has genuine love and affection. And he says, Sri Bhishma Dev is a great devotee of the Lord in relationship with servitorship. So I wanted to talk about, These are called rasas. So, Srila Prabhupada says in the intro to Bhagavad Gita, as soon as one becomes a devotee of the Lord, he also has a direct relationship with the Lord. And that relationship is evoked by the perfection of devotional service. That relationship that we have with Lord Krishna is evoked by the perfection of devotional service. But we know throughout the Gita, Srila Prabhupada emphasizes that in our present status of life, we have forgotten the Lord. But not only have we forgotten the Lord, but we've forgotten our eternal relationship with Him. And of the billions and trillions of living beings throughout the billions and trillions of universes, every living being has a particular relationship with the Lord eternally. And that's commonly called in Sanskrit Sarup, our eternal nature. And it's only through the perfection of devotional service that one can revive that relationship. So I will speak a little bit. This topic is called rasas, or some nectar. And this is oftentimes considered a very, very advanced topic, and not commonly something that one discusses, in such discussions. But Srila Prabhupada found it such an important thing to emphasize this relationship that you can see it even in the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita. So yes, it's a very intimate topic, but it's important enough that Srila Prabhupada mentions it right here. He says very elaborate subject matter, but briefly there's a relationship between the Lord and these 5 primary relationships, or rasas. So he thought it important enough to reveal something so important even in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita to the general public. So we know that the first lesson in devotional life is that God is great, right? We have to have that sambandha, that God, and most spiritualities have that inherent within them, that the infinite greatness of God, and to realize that we're only His infinitesimally small creations. And this, the Acharyas explained to us, is a very hard lesson for most of us to learn, because we come to this material world wanting to be God. We don't want to be subordinate to God. And so we become, the vast majority of us, because of that deep underlying desire, we become wanting that position in our work, in our family, in our relationships. And then there are the rare great souls who acknowledge God's greatness, even though there's a tendency to be independent in our heart. So first principle of spiritual religions or spirituality is God's greatness, but the unique quality of bhakti is that it's also a part of God's greatness that He can enter into very intimate and familiar relationships with devotees who have become completely pure in their heart and who serve Him solely out of love, like Arjuna and Bhishma Dev. To such devotees, He reveals His supreme personal form, which Krishna does not reveal to everybody. Of course, Duryodhana and Karna and Shakuni, they could all see Krishna's form, but they did not really know His nature. So Krishna is reluctant to reveal that to everybody. Most individuals only see Krishna's majesty, Aishwarya, A lot of spiritual practices emphasize approaching Krishna with that mood. But in such intimate, pure devotees like Arjuna and Bhishma Dev, Krishna reveals himself and allows them to have deep loving pastimes. And he does that because these are eternal associates of Krishna. They're not, sadhana siddhas. They didn't become perfected beings by practice. They're eternally perfected beings. We cannot become Arjuna. We cannot become Bhishma Dev, no matter how hard we try, nor should we try to do that. We should simply try to be their servants as they serve Lord Krishna. So Lord Krishna reveals these kinds of relationships in his pastimes called the Leelas to show the varieties of love that he can reciprocate with his devotees in the spiritual world. So the Lord comes to this world to reveal the nature of the spiritual world, where one can see him as Krishna, one who's all attractive, like Bhishma Dev is seeing him. So there are 5 types of rasas, or relationships, and each has they're called rasa because they have a particular taste that the devotee relishes. And as we saw in the introduction, Srila Prabhupada talks about it. So it goes in 5 stages: a passive state called Santa Rasa, and an active state, and as a friend, as a parent, and as a conjugal lover. So when these are going in orders of increasing intimacy, when one is in Shanta or passive state, there's not a lot of intimacy and there's a lot of Aishwarya, a lot of looking at the power and majesty of God. And when one is in what's called an active state here, which is as a servant, that's the intimacy increases a little bit and the Aishwarya is still there. And then one becomes a friend, that's, Sakya here. Then intimacy becomes more prominent and Aishwarya decreases and one becomes a parent relationship, then correspondingly more intimacy, less Aishwarya. And as Krishna's lover, there's tremendous intimacy and very little Aishwarya. So when one is in the Shanta Rasa, a devotee is overwhelmingly conscious of God's greatness. And so therefore he can only adore God passively. And some Vaishnava traditions, that's very prominent. And so that devotee doesn't feel the desire to actually render service because he or she thinks God is so great that there's nothing I can do for him. So that's a reason for this. Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj did not consider Shanta Rasa to be at the level of bhakti, but Vasacharya is bhakti there, but it's overwhelmed with Aishwarya. And the relationship of Dasya, like Hanumanji, there are also feelings of subordination to Lord's greatness, but they're not so extreme as to prevent the devotee from serving Bhagavan. And then in the level of friendship, now at that point, Aishwarya has to diminish because, like Arjun says, oh my Lord Krishna, please forgive me for being so intimate with you, right? Or like the Gopas, the childhood friends of Lord Krishna, they weren't thinking of as Bhagwan. Otherwise, how can they engage with him on an equal level as a friend? And in the parental Vatsalya Ras, Krishna, allows his devotee to act as his superior, and Krishna becomes a child. And the devotee is overcome with that relationship of parental affection, vatsalya. Vatsalya comes from the idea of the cow draping its calf with the soft skin that sits underneath the cow's neck. So it's that kind of loving protection of a parent towards their child. And of course, as a lover, then there has to be no idea of Lord's greatness, just idea of his sweetness. So that's what's being emphasized here. Let me just check my clock, please. So in the material world, Srila Prabhupada throughout the Gita and Bhagavatam explains that there are these what he calls perverted reflections, meaning lacking the purity of these spiritual relationships. And we're trying to enjoy rasas, and that's why we try to get happiness in our relationships. And that's why we get disappointed. In the 70s, there used to be a song called "I'm Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places," meaning in the material world. So therefore, all rasas or all relationships are hard in the material world because everything is unstable, temporarily, and materially motivated. We have relationships of hero worship that, oh, this person is a great person. We develop friends, we have children, we have spouses, and everybody starts out these relationships with hopes and expectations that we generate in our own mind. Yet there's always, even though there may be sweetness, there's always some undercurrent of dissent. Failed relationships, broken hearts, divorces, friends not speaking to each other, people leaving their hero worship of a particular personality, etc. And so what we keep going back again into these relationships, kind of like a moth going to the fire, because we have a desire to love. That love. Srila Prabhupada says in this particular verse that we read, he says, transcendental bliss is of different varieties. And the variety of activities in the mundane world is but a perverted reflection of transcendental bliss. So Krishna is revealing in this exchange between Bhishma Dev and himself the nature of his compassion and love for us and Bhishma Dev in particular, where Krishna can be the ultimate object of our pure affection, our most perfect hero, our most perfect master, our most perfect friend, our most perfect child, our most perfect object of our love. And so this is why Krishna ultimately comes to the spiritual world. Yes, he comes to diminish injustice, but he primarily comes to show us the nature of the spiritual world in our relationships. So there are these 5 relationships that we talked about: Santa, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhura. And sometimes they're mixed with other relationships. And Srila Prabhupada says here, Bhishma Dev is a great devotee of the Lord in the relationship of servantship. So Srila Prabhupada is saying that Bhishma Dev is actually in the Dasya rasa. And down here, Srila Prabhupada says, Bhishma Dev is a devotee in chivalrous relationship. The Lord enjoyed the wounds created by his great devotee, and because Bhishma Dev is in chivalrous relationship. So there are these 5 primary relationships, but there also can be mixed with other bhakti rasas, is what Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu Nectar Devotions calls it. So it can be mixed with other feelings like humor, anger, astonishment, etc. And this one is called, this chivalrous relationship is called Vira, Yudhya Vira. And Bhakti Rasamrita talks about that these are secondary. the primary relationship of servitorship for Bhishma Dev is the main thing, but it's these other relationships of chivalry or vira are also present, and sometimes they can be so powerful that they seem to be the main relationship, but it's actually the experience of that relationship of servitorship indirectly through vira. And there's so many esteemed devotees here. Can you think of other examples of relationships of vira with Lord Krishna, or this kind of chivalrous relationship? Yudhya vira is what Sri Rupa Goswami calls it in Nectar of Devotion. Can you think of other examples in Krishna's Leela of Yudhya vira? Where there are those that are engaged in chivalry, this fighting mood with like Lord Krishna? No. Okay. So if you think of Lord Krishna's childhood friends, Sri Dham.
Prabhu, sorry, Jai Vijay?
Yeah, Jai Vijay. Jai Vijay in a little different way, in that it's not quite at the same level of intimacy, but you're right. I mean, if you think about it, they're kind of forced to do it because of the curse of the four Kumaras. But certainly they're in the mood of chivalry, without a doubt. The mood of primary rasa of dasya, right? I think that's where you're coming from. And because of the curse, they're forced to be in this mood of fighting with the Lord. Others? So when you read about the Gopas, like you can read this in some internet pastimes like Gopal Champu, etc., where Sri Dham, one of Krishna's friends, says, "Oh Madhav, you think that no one can beat you, but if you do not flee from the fight that we're having, I'm going to defeat you. Please your friends." Or Stoka Krishna would say, "Oh Damodar." They all had particular ways to refer to Lord Krishna. You're only expert at eating. Don't boast after winning over, our weak friend Subal. Stoka Krishna here is going to destroy your snake-like arms. So these are like Yudhya Vira moods. And so Bhishma Dev is, adopting this Yudhya Vira mood. And Lord Krishna knows that Bhishma Dev so immaculately carried out his duty of honoring his father, yet also always remembering his relationship with Lord Krishna and manifesting it on the battlefield. That here Srila Prabhupada says in this verse, Bhishma Dev appreciated the all-merciful attitude of the Lord because he did not leave Arjuna alone, meaning he didn't give up Arjuna in spite of all the arrows that Bhishma Dev and others were shooting. And at the same time, and that would have created enmity in somebody who's worldly minded, that, oh, wait a minute, this person is my friend, but he's shooting arrows at me. But at the same time, because Krishna's free from all these mundane rasas, nor was he reluctant to come to Bhishma's deathbed, that although he was seemingly ill-treated by him on the battlefield. So Prabhupada says, Lord's merciful attitude are both unique in this picture. Mercy towards Arjun and mercy to Bhishma Dev. And you see that earlier in this chapter where Bhishma Dev is lying on his bed of arrows and Lord Krishna comes down and bows down to him. Not because Bhagavan has to bow to anybody, but he's remembering how Bhishma Dev intensely and completely fulfilled this relationship without any obstruction of being in this chivalrous Yudhya Vira mood. So much so that after the battle of Kurukshetra, after Yudhishthira was enthroned as a king, Yudhishthira afterwards went into after the coronation, Mahabharata talks about it, entered the room of Lord Krishna, and he saw Lord Krishna sitting, and he started speaking to Lord Krishna to say, how are you doing? And to thank him for his grace in winning the war and getting back the kingdom for the Pandavas. But Lord Krishna didn't say anything. But Yudhishthira could see that the hair on the body of Lord Krishna was standing up, and that Lord Krishna's face was filled with bliss, but his body wasn't moving. It was like stone. And he said to Lord Krishna, my dear Purushottam, yogis meditate on you. I'm surprised to see you meditating on someone. May I know who that person is? And Mahabharata says Lord Krishna opened his eyes and said, that tiger amongst men, Bhishma, is now lying in a bed of arrows. And he's like a fire that's about to go out, yet he's thinking of me. So my mind is also concentrated on him. Right over here, Bhishma Dev is saying in this verse, let my mind go into Krishna. But Krishna's mind is already going into Bhishma Dev. Krishna says to Yudhishthira, the Bhishma Dev is taking refuge of me by thinking about me while he's on the bed of earth. So I'm centering my mind upon him. Later on in verse 22 here, we'll see, he says here, yet despite his being equally kind to everyone, he has graciously come before me while I was ending my life, for I was his unflinching servitor. Ekanta bhakteshu. Ekanta bhakteshu. Bhishma Dev, why is he unflinching? Because he had this impossible task of fighting against somebody he loves so much, Bhagavan, Shri Krishna. But he did it so thoughtfully that he pleased the Lord and attracted Lord Krishna's mercy. So what's the instruction for us? I'll conclude by this. I'm way over time. That at a certain point in our life, we have to decide either to cultivate some serious remembrance of Krishna or to spend our lives serving various causes of material disturbance. So Bhishma Dev certainly had lots of material disturbances in his vow to protect whereas on the king, the throne of Hastinapur. But he cultivated some intense remembrance of Krishna. And so that's called the perfection of devotional service. So we have to decide whether we want to do that in this lifetime. And hopefully by the prayers of devotees and the blessings of acharyas and spiritual master, we can somehow do that. Thank you very much. There was so much to speak on this topic that I only started delving into it just a tiny bit. Thank you. Would anybody like to add anything? Make comments, questions? It's a very elevated verse, revealing the heart of a great devotee of the Lord.
Prabhu, I've never heard or come across that the scene wherein Yudhishthira Maharaj I was asking the Lord, and the Lord's meditating Vishnu Pitamaha. So thank you so much for sharing that intimate pastime.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's a Mahabharata. Thank you very much. Questions, comments?
Very nice class, Prabhuji. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining.
And it was very nice to hear initially the sort of the very vivid description of the battle, but later on the various rasas, and especially how you described the primary and secondary rasas. That was very nice. And I was thinking about the question. I didn't have any answer about who else is in a chivalrous mood.
Yeah.
That was a nice example that you gave there of the Gopas. I was thinking about that, but I wasn't sure, because I thought that as friends also sometimes you fight. But then I realized that that's the main rasa is Sakya, but the secondary in that moment could be Veer Rasya.
Yes.
But in Bhishma Dev's case, like you said, that aspect was so magnified that one feels that that is the primary one. And that's why he's the primary example of that. But he is primarily in Dasya. That was something I did not very carefully analyze earlier, and it became clear in this class. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Srila Prabhupada, I was also like you thinking, wait a minute, he's in this, how can one have, the chivalrous mood of Yudhya Vira in a rasa? It can only be in Sakya because of the pastimes of the Gopas. But then Srila Prabhupada, very kindly says here, he's in the relationship of servitorship. Yeah, this is such an intimate pastime that Sri Rupa Goswami only discusses this, in the very end of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So yeah, it's a very inspiring activity. Thank you for adding to or churning the nectar of this.
Very nice class. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I didn't confuse devotees. That's why going into, most of us don't tread into rasas. But the main takeaway for us is Bhishma Dev did his worldly duty, intensely remembering Lord Krishna at all times, and we cannot be Bhishma Dev. That's an eternal, perfected being. We can just try to follow his example. And so we should try to cultivate remembrance of Krishna by the practice of pure devotional service, Anya Bhilashata Sunyam, Yan Karmadi Anavrittam, Anukulyena Krishna Anushilam, Bhaktir Uttama, that continuous service, Krishna Anushilanam, favorably Anukulyena, without any other motivation, Anya Bhilata Shanyam. But we need some knowledge and some activity. That's why it says Yan Karmadi Anavrittam, meaning that Yan and activity is present in bhakti, but it's not covered by those activities. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vancha kalpatrivista kriposindhavi eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavyo namo namaha. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to his dear devotees like you. Thank you.